We're here supporting the London Tech Week. We're talking about IP and how you make money from it, how you protect it, what it actually is. So I've got Carl here with me, who's going to be talking about the IP landscape and everything that goes with it. Thanks very much. So Carl, thank you for agreeing to do this with me. Looking at the somewhat misunderstood area of IP within SMEs. As an investor, a lot of the time when an SME comes to me, they say they don't have IP. Now, I know full well that actually that's not true. But what they're talking about is when they say they don't have any IP, they actually mean I don't have a patent. What should we mean? What do we really mean when we say the IP in an SME?
Firstly, you're not alone. As a business advisor specializing in IP, I often hear my clients say, I don't know why I'm talking to you. Mm-hmm. There is no IP in my business. And again, what they really mean is, I don't have a patent. Oh, I don't think I've got a patent. And my role is to challenge that. So what do we start off with that challenge? First of all, is that we try and address what the business does and get them to understand that what intellectual property is and how it's relevant to them. And by that, what I mean is that fundamentally, intellectual property, by definition, is the property of the mind. Mm-hmm. It doesn't become anything tangible until it leaves the mind and is either written or drawn or spoken, sung or performed. Okay. So those are the key parameters that create IP. So therefore, your client, my clients that say they don't have it are not really understanding the process.
So they don't really understand what the IP landscape looks like. So looking at this from the perspective of an SME, what does a good, comprehensive IP landscape look like? What is an IP strategy, and how do you go about developing that to create the IP landscape within a business?
The landscape is incredibly valuable to the business in the first place. We're moving increasingly into an economy that is a knowledge economy. Mm-hmm. So intellectual property being, as I said before, the property of the mind, the knowledge economy is relevant. So what we're asking now is, how do businesses relate to that element of what they're creating? Mm-hmm. We start off with how they write materials. Every business writes something. And that is covered automatically, so in the form of copyright. So we have essentially two forms of intellectual property that every business will interact with, and that those are their unregistered rights, mm-hmm. which include copyright, elements of trademarking, and design rights. So they can all be unregistered, and you gain protection through their use. The second category, overarching category of intellectual property, are registered rights. Okay. And I'm going to repeat some of the things I've said. They include trademarks, mm-hmm. design rights, and patent. Okay. So you can actually apply to register for protection in those. There is another category which is more about business practice, which is the business will develop know-how from the very beginning. And before they even contemplate how they're protecting, formally as a registered right or informally as an unregistered right, they will be protecting their know-how through trade secret. And by trade secret, that is an element of the way that they do business that has a value to them, mm-hmm. and could damage the business should it become public knowledge.
What sort of support is available to explain and guide people through the difference between unregistered and registered and so on and so forth.
Your first port of call would be to visit a business support advisor, such as myself. There are opportunities provided by a collaboration between the IPO and the British Library, who kind of represent themselves as the BIPCs and they operate predominantly in central libraries throughout the country.
BIPC?
The Business Intellectual Property Centres.
Ah, right, thank you.
And they will provide some support and access to support to most businesses. Assuming that you have connected with a business advisor, then the next step is to look at how they can help you realise what you have within your business as assets.
Okay.
And very much like an accountant will come in and do your year-end audit and assess the nuts and bolts, the machines, the wingle waffers for grinding smoke within your business, and give it a value, then we can start to look at how we can create a register of assets within your business, starting from the very elemental side of things, such as the copyright you write and record, to sort of like the more inventive elements to what you're doing, which might be patentable, might be something that you could sort of like use a design right to protect.
Okay. I mean, not only does this now start to sound complicated, but thanks for the advice on who can provide help with that. It also sounds probably expensive. Is there any help with the expense? What sort of expense can a company expect to spend in order to generate that landscape of IP?
So if we're going to do an all-inclusive, overarching IP audit, we might be looking at about £3,000. There is support available through the IPO grant schemes to mitigate some of that cost, but you're looking at a £3,000 expense. There are other types of audit that you can go for, which are event-driven, and they might be the type of audit that you might engage in should you be talking to an investor who says, I need to understand the licenses. Using an analogy in coding and in the IT world, they might want to understand the license agreements you got with open source providers, and have you got license to commercialize that work in your new product that you're using their open source code to commercialize and make money for yourself.
Okay, so there is commercial financial help available through grants. You mentioned a couple of things there that are really interesting, one of which was the use of the word asset. So with an asset in a company, you can do stuff. Okay, so what do we mean when we say that the IP in a company is an asset? Because it's not physical. I mean, obviously you've said it becomes tangible once you write it down or you perform it or you sing it or whatever. But fundamentally, it's an intangible asset. So what do we really mean by that? And what can a SME do with that intangible asset?
So, assuming that not every business is quite right, they're not going to get a patent. So I'm going to use an example of businesses. All businesses will, over time, as they trade, create a brand. And within that brand, there will then be underlying goodwill that's associated with that. Okay. And they can then, they've got two routes. To protect that, and then once protected, they can then go and try and use that to their commercial advantage. First route is you could trademark it. You could trademark your brand. You can use Pantone, you can use sound, you can use design in terms of figurative type of trademarks, or you can just trademark a word. And you're registered for the area in which you are trading, and you must be trading on that brand. You go forwards, from that, and you can recognise that you've registered your brand through the use of the R in a circle in a suffix at the end of the registered trademark. The advantage you can then confer to your business is that you've now got a recognisable distinction against your competitors. Mm-hmm. And you can then seek to license what you do. So you can start to commercialise it. You can license it, you can franchise it, you can sell the brand.
Again, same question as before. How does a company get the help that it needs in order to do that work? Because I'm sure there must be a certain degree of complexity around registering a trademark, for example, or understanding how to go about looking for whether or not what you've got is patentable, bringing it back to patents. What help is available out there in order to do that?
There is a broad community of intellectual property professionals. From trademark attorneys to patent attorneys and people all the way in allied professions between those two parameters. I would always recommend getting their support. Mm-hmm. They are expensive, mm-hmm. but we are talking about assets that add value to your business. And sometimes I reluctantly look at my insurance policies and think, I am paying this for what? Until someone goes and bumps my car. Mm-hmm. And then I understand why that expense went out. It is very much similar to your IP. You don't always realise the expense that you invest into it. See getting solid advice from an intellectual property specialist as being yet another form of investment in your business.
So again, we're talking about expense.
Yes.
Yeah. So I understand that there can be some free advice from IP lawyers.
Yes.
And you say yes, so that's obviously right. A little bit more about that. But also, is there any sort of financial assistance, any grants or anything that is available to do that level of work above and beyond what we've talked about with the landscape?
So when you're kind of wanting to dip your toe into this landscape, most intellectual property attorneys will offer you 45 minutes pro bono.
Not even an hour.
Not even an hour, but, will they usher you out? Does the door slam closed? Or are you presented with 15 minutes invoice for that extra bit of time?
How do I make money from the IP? What can I do with my IP to raise money and make money?
Good question. That is what it's all about. It's not about having a certificate on the office wall. It's not like a Mensa test that you carry on around with you as a badge of merit. Yeah. The only real benefit of owning IP is to be able to commercialise it and monetise it.
Yeah.
So in the first place, you can seek to assert a monopoly. So in terms of registered rights, they're about asserting monopolies and stopping other people from copying what you've just done. Mm-hmm. However, that in itself, in asserting and prosecuting sort of infringers of your IP, can be an expense in itself that you don't want to have. So we'll park the idea about that. What we don't know is that when you assert or when you have a monopoly right, how many people read your patent and go, oh, I can't do it that way, and walk away from it.
Yeah.
Hopefully that person that reads for example, a patent, goes, I can't do it that way, I'm going to talk to them about, can I license it from them? And like the agreement with the joint inventor type scenario, then we can start to talk about how you can actually license out the intellectual property, and that becomes something that is becomes a value to the inventor. The other elements that you can then do is start to look at valuing how you came to arrive at this package of intellectual property, and ask yourself, has that got value that's adding to the business, and will other people see that value as something that they could invest in to further develop the business?
I've heard that you can now borrow money based on the value of your IP. Is that true? And if so, who do I speak to?
Increasingly, we're seeing this. And yes, so the equity that you're developing within the business with your asset is now becoming something you can use to generate a loan. Famously, most recently, the key mover has been NatWest.
Yeah.
And NatWest are being very active in this market. There is a caveat. You can't be a simple, I've invented something, still in the workshop, I haven't found my market type of inventor. We have to be in the market. We have to be generating turnover, because at the back end of year one, you're going to have to furnish the loan. So you're typically, the turnover that we're talking about is 100,000 per month.
Okay.
Be able to furnish the repayments of the loan come month 13. And so for more successful businesses that are kind of in the medium to large size definition of SME, that is becoming doable, and might exclude some of the smaller businesses.
But let's say, for example, I'm turning over £1 million a year, just over, and I need a loan in order to take advantage of, let's say, for example, a contract that I've just received from somebody like Airbus. Then if I have got IP within the business, which at that point I probably should have, and it has been properly identified and registered, then I can go to a bank and say, give me some money.
It's not quite as simple as that.
Damn.
So I'm sorry to disappoint. You will at least have to have a decent asset register.
Okay.
You'll have to have independent verification of the value of that asset register.
Okay.
And remember that we might not be talking about just one element of IP when we make that approach. So we're talking about a package of IP. And that's why the asset register is really important.
Okay. Which we haven't touched on so far in actual, words. Yes, we've talked about IP landscape, but what is an asset register when we're dealing with the IP?
So it's the output from an IP audit.
Okay.
Is the summary of that, the simple answer. But of course, as with all these answers, it's never a simple answer. So that asset register really ought to be a summary of your inventive activity from day one. And any business that we talk to ought to be doing this very early. It saves a lot of work if you have regular interaction with your co-founders, your employees around understanding the IP that they're creating, recording it, whether you register it or not, is subject to debate. But you're recording it and you're recognizing it. You've got something there to say, here you go, Chris. This is everything we've done. As you can see, this idea went through to registration. We decided that one is a patent, and off that we've now been able to generate other IP off it. And And also we've got designs and everything else in that register is something that is a record of your history.
Yeah.
There is an element to this that what I would recommend is that this becomes a piece of your good corporate hygiene.
Right.
I would go so far as to advocate that doing this then becomes something that becomes an item that is reportable on the board agenda. So on your quarterly board meetings, you are talking about your IP and you're demonstrating to anyone that this is ongoing conversation. The other thing that I would also advocate is depending on how much IP you generate in that quarter, it is probably worth paying for any business an hour of an IP specialist time.
Right.
It's investment again. They could quickly look through your IP assets and tell you which ones you need to register now, which ones you can park for a short while because you're not actually trading on that or there isn't an urgency, and which ones you should have registered yesterday, because there'll always be those cases, because you don't want the damage of opponents to arrive at the same answer to you and register rights ahead of you. Happens that we have this convergent evolution within if within commercial environments where if there's a commercial question to be answered, someone else will be trying to answer that question as much as you are.
Yeah.
So they might answer the question in exactly the same way as you, register the rights and stop you from actually using your inventive endeavours.
Funnily enough, I've just dealt with a company that had exactly that happen. They'd been working on something for 7 years, and a week before they were about to launch it, somebody registered it, doing exactly the same thing. So so they should have done it a lot earlier.
So that early conversation with an IP specialist would have said, right, get that registered. As soon as you registered the overarching invention, you get a year to manipulate that invention.
Yeah.
And then at the year end, you can either shelve it and say, I don't want to proceed. You can then go further through to examination. You can also then start to apply for something called a patent cooperation treaty, often referred to as an international patent, which isn't an international patent, but a PCT, which then buys you a further body of time to decide internationally where you wish to apply support. Remember that patents are territorial.
Right. So just because I got a patent in the UK, and does this apply for all the other types of IP registration? But
Yes.
It does. So you have to do it in multiple regions.
Yes. The recommendation is where you're going to be trading.
Okay.
Or where you're going to be manufacturing are the key concepts.
Right. And is there you've already suggested that a year is a time frame, but is there a lifetime, a life expectancy for these? How often do you have to renew registration?
So if I'm going to protect my brand, the renewal is 10 years.
Okay.
If I'm protecting a patent, we're talking about 20 years.
Right.
This is where the nuanced element of IP professionals come in. There are tricks of the trade which can extend beyond the 20 years by using tools such as divisional patents and other clever things that they do that are kind of, if you're doing it yourself, you just never know was available.
I think that really brings me to my sort of last question / point, do it yourself. Whenever I'm talking to SMEs, I already say, look, please get a really good accountant, and that needs to be a good business accountant, and please get a really good lawyer, okay, or solicitors, law firm. And I take it that particularly with this area, what we're talking about are specialists in the world of IP that know all of these ins and outs. So who's there at the early stage for an SME to support with that kind of activity of making money from the IP that you've got in the business?
I absolutely agree with what you're saying, and I would absolutely recommend to my clients get a local IP attorney who will give them solid advice from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. It's something that all our clients are super intelligent. They do stuff that I could never dream of. Many of my clients just blow my mind with what they're doing. Nothing is ever simple, and they are. If they practiced for 4 or 5 years in training to become an IP attorney, then I would say they're qualified to do their own filings. But they don't. Their job is to invent things for Airbus or diagnostic tools or write code, and therefore they're not spending their days reviewing case law as to how IP is being practiced and being applied. Therefore, I would say that is a key element to what they do. Bring someone in. First of all, the pathway that I would recommend anyone doing anything inventive: do your landscape searches, mm-hmm. Review people doing similar work, people that you recognise in the industry. So look at the academic papers, see what they're doing, then go and have a look at the IP registrations that they've got. Make sure that you've got reasonable comfort in operating in that area. And I'm avoiding using the term freedom to operate because that is a whole nuanced area of IP, which can lead you down a very, very expensive rabbit hole. So you do your research. You can limit your research to who and where. Mm-hmm. So again, the territories are important. And then from that, you start to talk about how to develop a platform for your strategy for protecting yourself. And that can be when to develop your brand. Of course, whilst you're busy beavering away in the workshop, you may not be needing to have brand protection, and brand protection can vary as you go forward. You might have an idea for a super kind of brilliant trademark, but until you actually get to the market, it's not a trademark until you trade. So park that, and that's expense that you don't need to be spending. Mm-hmm. If you're working with patent, then what you need to understand is if you're first to the market and you can't really find anyone doing exactly what you're doing, then you can make broad claims within a patent, which gives you a massive umbrella to work underneath and protects you going forwards. However, if you find someone that's doing a little bit of what you're doing over here and someone over there, you can then start to narrow down your claims. So you can still patent it. And there is a benefit. You might say, well, how's that going to help in terms of asserting a monopoly? So one of the things for doing this might be not so much the monopoly, but to get the tax advantages of gaining patent status. So it might be a tiny part of what you do might be patentable. But if it goes into the larger development, I use the example of the igniter system and the fuel system coming together. So if it goes, every rocket that gets sold with those two elements that have combined to create a patent, then you could fundamentally end up getting a 50% tax break against every rocket that you sell.
Right. So having that all lined up, all registered, with the option of actually not just making money, but saving money mm-hmm. From that is what we're really aiming for. Carl, this is a vast area. I know we could carry on for quite a while, but I think for the moment, thank you very much indeed. That's probably all that we need to go through for the moment.
You're most welcome, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks all. you.